Hi, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some basics of listening skills as we look at pastoral care together. There's some really important things about listening, and I think the most important is that we pay attention to the person and attention to what they're saying. I think that's probably a spiritual quality. There's a physical attentiveness and an emotional attentiveness. I'm going to talk in a minute about dual listening. But if you look at the pictures, which I've chosen deliberately, in the picture of the two women, you can see them leaning in together, looking at each other. You can see their heads are tilted slightly so that they can focus on each other. They've come in close together, so the knees there are nearly touching. So you see there's a closeness and an intimacy as they listen really carefully to one another. Still, there's some guarded language, isn't there? As the woman with the dark hair has her hands across her body. She's got a clipboard or whatever she's writing on across her body, and her legs are crossed. There's still some barriers there. If you look at the other picture, you see the legs crossed, particularly of the man in the middle, with his legs crossed and knee pointing towards the woman and foot to the next person. So that's clearly a barrier. Hands across his chest. The other person, although her hands are open and she's looking, her legs are crossed. So we've got to think really carefully about our body and the person who we're speaking to. I still think it's a good idea to watch how you're sitting and sit in a neutral way. Try not to put barriers across your body, your arms crossed or legs crossed. If you can't bear it, maybe you can cross your ankles under your chair. But try and sit openly. If that doesn't come easily to you, and it doesn't come easily, try practicing. Eye contact's really important. If you can look at somebody who you're talking to, of course it can be too much. Posture is very important. That's what I've just said. Try not to be crossed, try not to be slumped, try not to be leaning too far away. Touch is important. I'm doing this in time of lockdown, COVID-19, and touch is something that's really been missed. How do you touch somebody? Do you touch their hand slightly? Do you touch their arm slightly? Often we want to hug somebody, but that's probably for our own benefit more than from their benefit. So if you want to hug somebody, you need to ask permission. If you want to hold somebody's hands, you need to ask permission. We have to remember all the safeguarding stuff that's involved in touch. So our instinct is to touch, and I'm not saying that's bad, but it needs to be very carefully thought through. And as physical attentively, we're listening to speech and we're listening to silence, and to pay attention through the silence is a really difficult thing. It's a really important thing in terms of listening. You don't have to fill the silence on their behalf. You can stay in the silence with them. An emotional attentiveness, you're not responsible for how they feel, and you're not responsible for changing how they feel, but your job is to notice how they feel. Excuse me. This really reflects what Sarah Butler calls dual listening. So you're listening two things at once when you're listening. You're listening to the storyline, you're listening to the facts, the characters, the events, the scene being described. You can come back and double check any of those things. So if there's two Marys and you don't know which Mary's who, you can go back and double check that so you get the facts right. That's a really important part of listening. If you pretend you've heard it and you've understood what they're talking about, and then they find out that you haven't, that's really detrimental. That really shows you haven't been listening. So you can ask for points of clarification on any of those things because you need to get that straight. What the story is, it's really important to get the elements of the story all lined up. The process is more difficult. So you really are doing two things, and this is hard work. So if after you've listened to somebody really hard for a while, and you've done some pastoral listening, you need to sit down, have a rest and a cup of tea, That's entirely fine, because this is hard work. You're listening to how the story is told, in the content you're listening to, what is being told, how is it being told to you, what's the emotional tone, how does the emotional tone change, what sort of language is being used. Are sentences short and sharp? Is there swearing? Is there exclamation? Is it smooth? Is it disjointed? What's the sort of language being used? What are the images, similes and metaphors? It looked like this, she looked like that. And how much of it is real and how much of it is imagery? And what's the meaning communicated to the listener? What is it that you're understanding about this story that's being told to you? Not just what you know about the facts of the story, what are you understanding about the story? So you're doing two things in your listening process, which will require you to be still, concentrated, and in the moment. Effective listening takes time, it takes patience. There's got to be some level of confidentiality. It might be that you have to be really clear and say, I'm part of a pastoral team, and although I'll have to share some of what you say with the team, it'll be kept confidential within that team. Confidentiality really means you don't go home and tell it to your husband or phone your friend and tell your friend. So even when something awful has been told to you, you can hardly bear, you need to respect the confidentiality. There's a thing said about clergy that they only tell one person at a time, and then everybody knows. I've heard that, and that's been my experience. Something that said to somebody that said to someone else, and came back to me. Each person had only broken confidence with one other person. Respect is important. Respect the person, regardless of what they're saying. I was reading in Evensong, Romans 2, which talks about God being the judge. Don't judge other people, because God will judge you. We're not there to judge. We're there to respect other people, to show them something of God's mercy and God's grace. You need a bit of energy for this work. It takes your energy. If you've not got energy in the room, you're not listening properly, and it takes your full attention. It's no good getting your phone out and doing stuff on your phone. You need to attend to what's being said to you. How do you build a relationship with the person that you're listening to? You give them some positive attention, some active listening. That means you're not just silent. It means saying yes, no, oh. So those verbal signals are really important. Sometimes you can repeat what they've said to you, just to be sure that you've heard it right. Give the person time. If your time is limited, tell them that. Haven't you got an hour? I'm really sorry, I've only got an hour at the moment. And if you run out of time, you can say, I'll come back tomorrow, or I'll come back next week, probably. But be clear about your time boundaries and give the time that you have. If you're with somebody and you're listening to them and you're looking at your watch all the time, that's not giving them time. It doesn't make anything any quicker, and it just makes them feel not attended to. Remember the person's name, that's so important, isn't it? Naming's key. So if you're not very good with names, write them down somewhere. If you've not met someone before, introduce yourself. Express some basic courtesies. How are you? Would you like a cup of tea? The social chit chat is really important for building relationships. You can ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. How are you feeling? What did you feel about that? What happened next? How would you like this to end? Check out your assumptions. Check them out. Don't just spurt them out. Check them out. I'm assuming when you refer to Mary that she's your wife. Is that right? Or whatever it is. Check that out. That's all right. They know you're listening if you're checking out the detail. Don't interrupt. I interrupt people lots because I get excited about what I've heard and stop listening. So really, really hold that. If you have to sit on your hands and remind yourself not to interrupt their story, regardless of how excited you might be or how careful you might be listening. Genuineness. I've put this in red, talking appropriately about yourself, because this isn't about you, it's about them. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's okay to say, oh yes, I've not been sleeping well during this COVID-19 either. There's an empathy in that, but really hard to go on beyond that. So it might be that you don't talk about yourself at all. That's the better than talking about yourself too much and turning it into your thing. Respond naturally. Share the feelings appropriately. It looks to me like you're feeling sad. I'm feeling a bit sad listening to this story of yours. Are you feeling sad too? Be spontaneous. So trusting yourself, trust in the work of the Holy Spirit that you're responding appropriately. Keep your verbal behaviour and your non-verbal behaviour consistent. That's that arms, legs crossed, saying you're open and you want to listen, and crossing arms and legs, and being defensive. So be careful about that. Don't be defensive. You're not there to defend yourself, you're there to listen. Don't pretend to be someone or something other than you. So you're always you, regardless of what you bring. You're listening carefully to someone, but you're still you. Reflect back to the other person accurately. And you might share related experiences of your own, but be very sparing about doing so. These are the two do nots. I could have asked you to give these. Don't give advice. If I was you, I would. That's really tricky because you're not them. So your task really is to enable them to find their way out of this hole more than for you to find it out for them. Don't talk too much yourself. Try thinking. Try sitting in silence. Definitely don't speak more than they speak. So be really careful about where the balance is. Don't interrupt. I've said that before. But listen to the end, even when you've got something to say. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't do labeling or don't do generalizing. That's a kind of judgment. So listen to them out without jumping to conclusions. Be led to them. Don't show boredom, as if you don't know what's going on. Looking at the clock, looking out the window, yawning. Oh no, I've been in so many pastoral situations where I felt so tired and wanted to yawn, and just can't, because that really devalues the person's story. You can't even be able to hear it. Don't negate or devalue the problem. So don't minimize it and say lots of people have that problem. And don't disbelieve it. Well, that seems like an odd reaction. Are you sure? Go with it. Even though it might be seeming odd. Get them to talk about it some more. It's all right to say what do you mean by that. Can you explain how that felt to you? And then you go on. So minimizing it, lots of people might have that problem. So lots of people might have broken their leg, but for that person in that moment, it's their leg that's broken, and they want to tell you about their leg. They don't want to hear or know that 100 other people broke their leg this week, because for them, theirs is the only pain that they're feeling, and you don't know what their pain is, and that's unique. We talked about it in terms of a broken leg, but it could be a broken heart. It's unique to them. So listen to the story. Don't ask closed questions such as, do you like your mother? Much better to say, how do you feel about your mother? So it can't be yes or no, really. Don't ask multiple questions. That happens to me a lot, that I think about 10 things that I want to know and they all follow on from each other, and then the person can't answer them because you've confused them. So think about the question you want to ask in that moment. So accept generalizations without querying. Everybody thinks I'm a loser. What do you mean by everybody? What do you mean by loser? Don't just accept that, because that's a huge generalization and it may not be true. It may be that Frida once told you you're a loser, but that doesn't mean that everybody agrees with Frida. So can you see how that can unpick? I don't make judgments. I've talked about that. We're really asked not to do that in Scripture, to judge each other, and I think we do it all the time. But really, hold back your judgment. God's the judge. So at the moment, our job is to share God's grace. Don't devalue the person. Don't protect them either. So they're feeling this, and it's their feelings, and you can't protect them from their own situation. But you can sit with them in it. Don't divert it. So if they want to talk about that, allow them to talk about it, rather than switching off to talk about the weather or something that's just a little bit easier for you. Use cliches. I remember when I was a teenager and a boyfriend finished with my mother, used to say there's plenty more fish in the sea, and I thought that was the most unhelpful thing ever. I didn't want to go out with fish apart from anything else. So really be careful about the cliches. Your job's not to cheer somebody up. Your job's to sit with them in their distress and to bring some hope. That's not the same as cheering them up. So remember that. Don't say, think of others who are much worse off. Don't say, oh, tell me about it. When I had my ingrown toenail, the doctor said it was the worst she'd ever seen, or whatever it is that you've got, the 10 times more. Come on, it can't be that bad. You just don't know. You just don't know. Yeah, it is that bad to that person in that moment. Thank God you still have 2 children there. Do you say that when somebody's child has died? Cheer up, tomorrow is another day, and that comes me back to what I just said. Our job's not to cheer up. Our job's to sit in the misery and actually make somebody feel worse if you can't be sad or you can't bear to be with them when they're sad, because a lot of people have to put on a smiley face a lot of the time. This stuff about self-disclosure is in red because it's danger. Let's be careful. The role of the caregiver is detached and compassionate. Try to avoid lengthy stories that make it difficult for the other person to continue. You're listening to them, they don't have to listen to you. If it seems appropriate to share a feeling or experience, make sure it's for the benefit of the other person. Am I saying this for me, or am I saying this for them? And when it's appropriate, you may share how you're feeling about what they're saying. Be very careful about that. And it might be something about, I feel angry on your behalf. I feel a bit sad on your behalf. I can feel myself on the edge of tears as I listen to your story. I'm so sorry about this sadness. You don't have to hold their sadness, but it could just be a fleeting thing. Remember, you're not feeling the emotion on behalf of them. You can clarify, I've said that earlier. Ask open questions, focus, help the speaker to pick out and elaborate on what it is they really want to say. Reflect back. I've heard you say this to me, is that correct? I heard you tell me about Frida being a bit bossy, is that right? And you can reflect back on what you've heard. Ask for more details, that's fine. Doesn't show you're not listening. So you can say, just tell me a little bit more about that. What's it she really said and what did she do? You need immediacy by reflecting on what is happening now in the conversation. So in this conversation now, we're doing this, so you're thinking about this or saying that. Summarize, this is what I think you've said to me, is that right? And check that out. And they might want to clarify it, might help them hear themselves what they've said to you. There's always awkward pastoral visits, aren't there? And here they are, especially the one with the television on. I hope you don't have awkward pastoral visits and enjoy these processes of listening to people and their stories.